Okay, welcome to the WPIAL Blitz Show. I'm Bruce Badgley. Along with me is my buddy Ian McMeans. How you doing tonight, Ian?
Pretty good, pretty good. We're now more than halfway through the regular season, so playoff races are starting to heat up, and we're honored tonight to have Newcastle coach Fred Mozzocio joining us, coming off a big win over Aliquippa, getting their hi, this is my daughter Margaret.
Hi,
She's falling
Margaret.
in bed. Go to bed, sweetie. Oh, you're getting your water bottle. Okay, good night, honey. This is why we do the show at 9:30 because my kids are usually in bed. But
That's great.
yes. So yeah,
Anyway,
she's
go ahead, Ian.
she's in kindergarten. At any rate, yeah. So Coach Mo from Newcastle coming off a huge win over Aliquippa. First win over the Quips for Newcastle since 1987, I saw. So, Coach Mo, we had you on the show last year. Sort of about a quarter of the way into the season, talking about the hot start that Newcastle had, kind of turning things around after back-to-back 1-9 seasons, and now you're off to a 5-1 start and a win over Aliquippa, who's the defending conference champion. So, talk a little bit about the journey that your program's been on to get to this point since you took over the job.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind, to be honest with you. We've started January 2nd, the first day I was hired, and got into the weight room, and just started from there and started implementing the offense, the defense, the terminology. And like I told everybody, getting through it the first year, I think, is the hardest. It's like learning a foreign language, whoever you are, when you're starting up a new program, or you're going to a program for the first time. They have to learn the terminology, they have to learn everything about it. So it takes a good year to get everything in and get them to understand what you're talking about. You find that first year that you're saying some terms, and you think they know what you're saying, and they know what you're meaning, but they're thinking something different. So you're on two separate pages because they came from a different staff or whatever. So it's been a journey. It's been a nice learning experience for everybody. But we feel like now at this point, everybody's on the same page, and we're finally ready to go.
And as a legacy coach too. I mean, you went to Newcastle, correct, before you started coaching and what have you, right?
Yes, yes, I
And
played
and
at Newcastle.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about that, how that has, how you personally feel, because after, the program was, on a downtrend, now you've come in, and obviously there's a cultural difference now versus when you came in. So how do you feel about that personally, on how that has affected not only, you know, the team, but the school?
Yeah, I think it's made a huge impact. You know, when I came here with my staff, of course, you need a staff to do anything. I don't do it alone. I have a great coaching staff that is with me every day, and in the off season, we do a tremendous amount of work, as every coaching staff does. But you really need to have that support system there to help you turn a program around, and they've been with me every step of the way. So. I thank all them for that. As far as the culture goes and everything we do here, growing up in Newcastle, it's just something that was bred into you as a young person. You wanted to play for the Red Hurricanes. So we tried to bring that same mentality back here when we came back to Newcastle. We talk about the heyday of the 60s and the 70s and the early 80s, and try to give them a little history of behind the program and why it's so prestigious and what it means to people in the community. So we have a lot of former players come in and speak to them. Some that have gone on and had great careers in Division I coaching, and maybe played in the NFL. So guys that have played Division I college football. So it's a whole community here trying to pull together and turn this thing around.
And if I'm correct, this is also the 50th anniversary year of the 1975 championship, right?
Yes, I was made aware of that by a good friend of mine who was the quarterback on that team, Paul Felina. Yeah, so Paul reminded me of that a couple weeks ago. Yeah, I was at that game actually at Pitt Stadium.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Nice.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Nine.
Incredible.
Yeah.
That's
I was 9 years old.
that's what I mean about what I was talking about there. You know, that you're a legacy coach, and I mean, you know, the emotions. I can't even imagine, you know, the emotions that must go through, you know, you and your coaching staff in getting a team prepared, because, you know, this is stuff that I mean that you've lived your life with, and
Right.
now, you know, you're leading the team, and you're kind of and you're bringing them back, and you're getting the community going. Like I said, that has to be a big sense of pride in you personally, in being able to lead this program.
Yes, no doubt. You know, you grow up in Newcastle, you have family that played before you, you know, cousins that have played there, close friends of the family. Um, you know, I played there myself. My friends that I played with, you know, a bunch of great football players and great people. You know, you're sort of carrying everything, you know, on your back for them. They want to see this program back on top. So you're not only doing it, you know, for yourself in the present, you're trying to do it for the community and the people that have played here in the past. And, you know, there's just a lot of people that care about the program and want to see it back on top. So it's been a great run up to this point because we're getting a lot of community support, a lot of the former players coming around and, you know, helping out any way they can. And it's been a fun ride so far.
That's awesome. And that's actually a great segue into my next question, which was, you know, kind of take us through the game this past weekend, the win over Aliquippa and the emotions
Yeah.
of it, because, you know, you were up and then they scored late to tie
Hmm.
it. And then you had a freshman quarterback drive you down the field and score the winning touchdown for you. So just kind of, you know, talk us through the game a little bit and, you know, kind of the roller coaster and how you kept your team focused, you know, all
Right,
the way to the
right.
end.
Well, you know, the last few weeks, you know, leading up to this thing, you know, we pretty much talked about Aliquippa every day. You know, they're a tremendous program. They're well coached. And one thing Aliquippa does when you play them, I think everybody knows, you know, they come after you. They're going to hit you in the mouth and they're going to hit you over and over and over again. So we had to be ready to withstand that type of physicality that they were going to bring, and we've been preparing for that, you know, for a whole year really since they handed it to us last year. So, you know, throughout that game it was back and forth. It was a hard hitting football game from both teams. The game could have went in either way. We got the ball last with 3 minute, if I remember right, it was 3 minute and 3 minutes 12 seconds or 22 seconds, and you know we were able to drive that last touchdown. I think was like a 75-yard drive or what have you for the winning score.
Do you fear the fact that you may have, you know, as you did, you had so much focus on this Aliquippa game? I mean, how much more emotion is left in the tank? You still
Yeah.
have quite a few games, and then hopefully postseason.
Yeah, we definitely have some juice left in the tank. The kids are ready to go. You know, they came back into we were in the weight room Saturday morning, early Saturday morning, getting their lifts in, film
Wow.
study after. You know, so they were pretty excited, obviously, about the win. But they knew when we reported back today after school that it was time to get ready for Montour. So now it's another WPIAL giant that we're going to take on, and you know we're looking forward to the challenge. It's not going to get any easier. We got to have Montour and we have West Allegheny next, so we know what's ahead of us. And you know that's the great thing about playing in the Parkway Conference. Every week's a battle.
Yeah, the schedule makers didn't really do you guys much of a favor by putting, you know, the three co-champions right in a row to
Yeah,
start conference play. But one of the things I love about what you've done with the program though is that, like you said, you're not going to back down from anyone. You're going to go out and play everyone. You went out and scheduled Penn Hills in week 0, you know, to try and get another quality tough opponent on the
right,
schedule. And
right,
you know, you shut them out. Actually, you shut out you know this. I'm telling you to the people watching,
right.
you know, Newcastle shut out 4 opponents that they've faced this year. So talk a little bit about your defense and, you know, the guys in the trenches, the guys that are making the plays on defense to, you know, lead you to this success, holding Aliquippa to 12 points, shutting out 4 other teams. Like, this is an
Sure,
incredible defensive start to the season.
sure, no doubt. We've hung our hat on the defense from the start this season. We knew the defense was going to be headed ahead ahead of the offense starting off, just because we're so young in so many skill positions offensively at quarterback, running back, receiver. We have a lot of people that are young, freshmen, sophomore on the field. So we hung our hat on the defense and we told them, you got to carry us here this first half. And they've done a tremendous job, starting with Jaden Schaefer, Mason Cook, um, DJ Gordon. You got Travis Wetzel, Chase Lemon. All those guys are just playing tremendous defense for us. Coach Fermi and the staff are putting a tremendous amount of time in. Paying attention to detail, making sure that everybody's in the right places, and it's just been a good start for the defense. And as far as scheduling Penn Hills the first week of the season, that's why we did schedule them. We thought that it would be good preparation for us to play a strong opponent like that and get ready for Parkway Conference.
Yeah, and with that too, leaning on that defensive team, and then obviously, with as you said, the young offensive side there, it shows me that you and your staff definitely coach from a point of we're going to see what hand we're dealt and then adjust from there rather than fitting these guys into a prefab system that's already designed, right? Is that your philosophy?
Yeah, we always, every year, we look at the personnel we have coming back, and, you always have to make slight adjustments for what you have coming back and, what schemes you're going to go with. So, they may stay, your base stuff may stay the same, but you're always looking on ways to maximize the talent that you have on the team each and every year.
So one thing that we always ask the coaches on the show, and you mentioned a little bit about the defensive guys, but I always say it's easy to find stats for the running backs, the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, but football's won and lost in the trenches. So
Right.
you talked about your defensive guys. If you want to give shout outs to your offensive line too, we always like to give coaches the opportunity to do that because those guys don't get as much press as everybody else.
Yeah, no doubt. Hank Ritter is a senior guard for us. He does a great job. He's one of those guys that goes unheralded because, he's an offensive lineman. Nobody sees his name in the box scores, as you said. DJ Gordon, um, Demetrius Fambro, Jocko Lane. Those guys do a great job for us. Mike Harris. It's just a good working bunch there. Lucas Morgan. They put a lot of time and effort into it, man. During basketball season, we lived up in the weight room, and those guys really tried to improve their bodies, tried to get as thick as possible for the season. And so far, they've been holding up, and they're getting better and better every week.
Wow. This is turning into, we have a couple of coaches here that we kind of have annual visits with now, Ian and
Yeah.
Coach Mo here. We're going to have to start doing this on an annual basis here. I mean, I guess that means that you're winning and things are going good, right?
That's right. That's a good thing. Hopefully, we keep that trend going here moving forward.
You got a final question for him there, Ian?
I think I asked pretty much everything. The only other thing I'll say is that you mentioned your whole staff, and you can't do it without your staff. If you wanted to give shout outs to the members of your staff as well, try and get as much press for everyone as possible.
Yeah,
Here.
no doubt. There's a lot of them. I don't want to miss anybody, but Ryan Fermi's my defensive coordinator. Ron DePorzio, offensive coordinator. We have Matt Mangino, Chris Sapienza, my son Mike Mozzocio, Weston Fanco, Chris Avery. Trying to think who else. We got about 15 of them, so
Wow.
we know that we had to coach these guys up, and I make sure there's eyes on everybody. Gianni Oliva, um, Jeff Sanfilippo, a lot of people there that have played for me or in the past at Neshannock or at Newcastle, or a lot of people that have been in the Newcastle program that, are on the same page as us and know what it takes. So I apologize if I forgot everybody
Oh.
in this.
Well, I tell you what, that's okay. That's okay, Coach. I tell you what, we're really happy the fact that we're gonna have to start making this maybe annual visits here, and I'm sure the fans of Newcastle will like that too because it means that you're bringing the program back to where it belongs. So,
Yep.
Coach, I tell you what,
One more shout
sure.
out. I forgot about the legend from Newcastle, Pat Kane, is on my staff. He's
Wow.
a former WPIAL champion in basketball and football, and also you have our general manager Mark Hassan, who's been with me
Yeah.
for a number of years. Yeah,
Wow. That's
so great
incredible.
people, great people. So you need a whole family to run a football program. It's not done by one person by any means.
Well, it certainly isn't. Listen, Coach, thanks for taking some time in a very busy week to spend some time with Ian and I. And we're looking forward. Hey, maybe it means two times in one year if you can get on a winning streak in the postseason.
That sounds good. We're going to try to string some together.
All right.
All
Listen,
right.
thanks a lot. Just go ahead and exit out, and
All right.
Ian and I'll take off. Take
Thank you,
care.
guys. Yep.
Thanks so much for
See you
joining us,
now.
Coach.
Bye,
Good luck the rest
Coach.
of the way.
Go Canes.
We'll see you. Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
What a job he's done there. I mean, they were back-to-back 1-9 seasons, and then to get them, to around 500 last year, and now off to a 5-1 start this year, and beating Aliquippa, putting themselves right in the middle of the playoff race. Like, what a great turnaround job. And you can tell, I mean, being a Newcastle alumnus and having played there, you can tell how much he cares, not just about the program, but about the community too. And it's not just about football; it's bringing the whole community back and bringing the whole community along for the ride.
There are, as obviously covering these games as you and I do and have over the years, there's a million stories like this out there. And that's what I love about our opportunity on this podcast is to highlight some of these men and players and teams that are just so inspirational. They should be inspirational for people to see how these coaches go about their business, how these teams and communities can lift themselves up just through football. And I talk about that on football is probably the single biggest thing that I think will set a school and a community on a path for an entire year. And it's great to see that there in Newcastle. And these are great stories. And look, fans, some of our fans that are watching the show or whatever like that. If there's some great stories out there that we may be missing, hey, that's what this live chat's all about. Put that in the live chat. Ian and I will take a look at it. I mean, we're on Twitter. Let us know. We want to bring these stories out of all these great coaches and teams, right, Ian?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to take too much credit, sort of jokingly, but last year we had both Coach Mozzocio from Newcastle and Coach Hansen from South Allegheny on the same night because they had both taken over programs that had been 1-9 for 2 straight years, and then both of them were off to, I think it was like 4-0 starts or something like that
Yeah,
last season.
I think it
And
was five. Yeah, four. I think five, maybe 5-0 for
maybe.
Newcastle.
But I mean, now Newcastle's 5-1 and South Allegheny's 6-0. So they both got the WPIAL Blitz show bump,
Yeah, and we're starting to get this stable of coaches with annual visits. Like we'll have to figure out when we're going to have to get Coach K on here and get this year. I think he looks forward to that visit every year, and we look forward to talking to him. But as we do all of the coaches,
Yeah.
and look, if there are coaches in here that want to join the show as well, I know we have a lot that watch. Hey, drop us a line. Tell us you want to stop by. We'll definitely open it up for really any coach that wants to join.
Yeah, we can definitely make time for you if you want to stop by
That's
and
right.
chat with us. We know you're busy though, so we'll try and be respectful of your
Hey,
time.
look,
But
it's after the kids go to sleep. It's when you're kind of winding down for the evening. Why not
yeah,
talk a little football,
it's true. It's true. All right. So speaking of talking football, let's get rolling here. So thank you everyone for tuning in. If you've are watching us live or later, you've obviously know where to find us on YouTube. You can also check us out on social media, as well as all of my WPIAL related articles on steelcityblitz.com. I have my Games of the Week articles, my WPIAL standings page, which gets updated every Friday and Saturday night after the games are complete. So check that out. And there'll be a lot more content coming as we head down the stretch run towards teams clinching playoff spots and whatnot. So let's talk about some of the big results from this week. The biggest one, Central Catholic getting a convincing dominant victory over North Allegheny, held them to just 2 field goals. Central, the defending WPIAL champs in 6A, now pretty much has the top spot in the conference in the regular season on lockdown. So they'll, unless something really weird happens, like they'd have to lose 2 games to teams that are pretty well below them in the standings. They'll be the #1 seed in the playoffs and have the inside track to making it back again to the WPIAL championship game. Moon beating Bethel Park in a back and forth thriller. Moon kicked a field goal with, I think, about 12 seconds left or something like that to beat Bethel. But that's a big result in the 5A Allegheny 6 conference, because 3 teams in each 5A conference get guaranteed playoff spots. And considering Peters Township, Upper St. Clair, and South Fayette are also in that grouping, last year Bethel handed it to Moon pretty well, and Moon had to get a wild card just to get into the playoffs. Moon getting that win sets them up very well for getting a playoff spot. The games of the week, Peters Township and Upper St. Clair in an absolute classic. This was the KDKA game of the week that our friends Dan Zangrelli and crew did it on KDKA radio. And Peters and Upper St. Clair just went back and forth. At the end of the day, Peters scored a late 4th quarter touchdown to pull out the win. But just a great back and forth matchup between 2 neighboring rival communities. This is, the 3rd time they've met in the last 2 seasons. They met in the regular season last year and then in the semifinals, and now again this season, and very well could meet in the playoffs again this year. So a really good win for Peters Township. And then Thomas Jefferson getting a late fumble recovery and scoring a touchdown to beat Bell Vernon. Bell Vernon almost pulled it off against Thomas Jefferson. I feel like that's kind of been the story of Bell Vernon this year, that like they've been close with a lot of teams, but didn't quite pull it off. And TJ on the flip side has been close with a lot of teams, but found winning plays when they needed to. TJ's not blowing teams out, but they're finding those winning plays when they need to, which I think is a great mark for the defending champs in Thomas Jefferson. Our 2 upsets.
I had one question to ask you on the Thomas Jefferson game there, or more related to, Bell Vernon. And, how do you think, this first half of this year is going to affect Bell Vernon's ability to get into the postseason?
That's a good question. So last year, Bell Vernon got in via the wild card.
Right.
And they had a couple blowout losses in non-conference play. It's a tough question, because it does, what they do the rest of the way is definitely going to matter. They got blown out by Aliquippa. They played McKeesport relatively close. They played TJ somewhat close. So, they've got a tough game against Chartiers Valley this week, who's playing really, really good right now. So that game against Char Valley, I think, is going to have a much bigger impact on their playoff potential than what happened in non-conference play. But I will say that, looking back on the choices the WPIAL made last year in their, wild card decisions, they didn't really put a ton of weight in the non-conference schedule. Central Valley was a 5-5 team, and they gave them the #2 seed because of what they did during conference play. They lost all of their non-conference games. So I think there's not a ton of weight on the non-conference schedule, but maybe a little bit.
I think it's panic button time. I think that so much is riding on the rest of their games, that they've got to run the table to get in this year versus last year. I think it's panic button time for them. Of all of these teams, maybe even Central Valley. I think at some point in time, you have to weight the games that you've played against the overall. And I think, and we talked about Central Valley being close to panic button time. I think it's, we haven't gotten there yet, but I think Bell Vernon and Central Valley is panic button time.
I think it's getting close. I think you're right that Bell Vernon's pretty much put themselves in a spot where they might be able to absorb one more loss, but they definitely can't take 2. And they've got Char Valley and they've got Trinity left on the schedule, and they have to win one of those 2 And if they lose to Char Valley this week, they're going to put themselves in a bad spot where they have to beat Trinity the final week of the season.
Yeah.
So, and 4A is going to be super tight because there's only 8 playoff teams. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
correct.
We'll see what
That
happens with
and that
Bellburn.
that has a lot to do with it.
Mm-hmm. So the
All right,
upset of
sorry
the
to
week.
interrupt.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Newcastle, obviously, we just talked with Coach Mo about their big win over Aliquippa. Newcastle's first win over the Quip since 1987, which was the year after I was born. So that's a
Ooh-wee.
that's a huge win for Newcastle, not only for the current group of kids, but also everyone who's been through that program over the years that has had to watch them lose to Aliquippa. They didn't play every year in that time span, but still, they've played quite a few times. And then a Saturday afternoon game that I think kind of flew under the radar a little bit, but Riverview handed it to Greensburg Central Catholic, which was a real eye opener to me. And now the 1A Eastern Conference, we'll get to it when we run through the conferences, but the 1A Eastern Conference is just a wild mess in the middle of the pack for the last couple of playoff spots. So this game really shook things up there. Greensburg Central Catholic had been a team that was like right there in the mix with Clairton for the last couple conference titles, and Riverview was like a fringe, almost make the playoffs, but just miss program. And now Riverview getting this big win puts them right smack dab in the middle of the mix for that too. So shout out to their team, their program, for putting themselves in position to contend for a playoff spot down the stretch. Some other noteworthy results in 3A: Avonworth, the defending champs, getting a convincing win in a rematch of last year's championship game over Central Valley. And then Amani Christian went down 16-0 early to North Catholic. And really, this game was North Catholic couldn't stop Amani's run game. And Amani was basically just snapping it to their quarterback and letting him run the whole game, or handing it off, or direct snapping it to somebody else. North couldn't stop them. The only one who could stop Amani was Amani. And they did a couple times early in the game. And that was the difference, was that they had a couple bad snaps. They had a couple penalties, but they cleaned that stuff up in the second half and just pulled away from North Catholic. North couldn't do anything offensively. The whole Amani defense was just flying around. So Amani definitely setting themselves up to be the top challengers to Avonworth in 3A. So we'll see how that plays out as the season goes on. And then another one I think worth mentioning, again in the 1A Eastern Conference, Fraser, who had also been kind of a bottom dwelling team for the last few years, beat Brentwood, who was the last team into the playoffs last year. So another game that kind of mixes up the standings there. That could have been an upset, but I didn't feel the difference between them was so big that it rose to the upset level. But it's definitely noteworthy as we get into the thick of the playoff races.
Yeah,
here.
you're gonna have to put some like a little of what defines noteworthy, and all of our phrases here. Panic button. We'll have to put that page out there somewhere.
Or I could just make it up every week like I do.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So our WPIAL Blitz Show player of the week is Wyatt Sparbani from Western Beaver in a big matchup against Riverside, their conference rivals, who also made the playoffs last year. Wyatt ran for 265 yards and 7 touchdowns. That is not a typo.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So we've got some highlights here that we can show of him just running right through the middle of Riverside's defense.
Let's give some credit to that offensive line too. Holy
some very
cow.
nice holes being opened up here, but also just the breakaway speed to just run away from everybody. Here's a defensive highlight. And another one on offense that Western Beaver really just took it to Riverside. And it was really because of what Sparbani was able to do on the ground. Another one that he just takes all the way around the corner. And, we talked about this last week with regards to kicking, but in the running game too, like these guys playing on natural grass surfaces, like it definitely, they don't have the same consistent footing and speed levels and things like that the artificial turf gives players. So putting up this many yards over the course of a game, and this many touchdowns is an incredibly impressive performance.
Yeah, it's funny. Most coaches I talk to, when a lot of times when the first thing that I do when I'm broadcasting a game and it's on grass, I'm asking the coach about that. I mean, I can feel a difference. I mean, you got this lumpy old grass field versus, like a nice fast track or what have you. A lot of the coaches poo-poo it because most of them still will practice on that surface that particular week or practice on grass all of the time so that when they get out there on that nice, turf field, that, it feels better. I mean, almost like, it was funny. I mean, I had that conversation with Joe Heaton last Friday night at the broadcast in the Susquehanna Township game, and I liken it to a baseball player that swinging a bat with a donut and then taking it off to swing at a pitch as the difference between practicing on grass and then going out and playing on turf. It just feels that much better. You can swing and run that much faster.
Yeah. So a couple cool subplots here too. Western Beaver just installed lights in their stadium this year. So this was the
Ooh,
first year they were able to hold night games. So those
wow.
highlights under the lights, this is a first for Western Beaver having night games this season. So that's
Wow.
pretty cool too. The other thing I'll mention is that, I always think it's funny that every WPIAL team 4A and higher has a turf field. And yet we're playing our WPIAL championship games at Acrisure Stadium, Heinz Field, whatever you want to call it, which is a grass stadium. And I think for a long time that benefited teams like Aliquippa, who for a long time had grass and played on
Wow.
grass, every week of the season. And then they'd go play these teams in the championship game that had played on turf. And they just weren't used to how grass slowed their offense down and their passing games were out of rhythm and things like that. That I do think we've had some, I'll say, sloppy WPIAL championship games. And I think that's part of the reason why that when, especially for the bigger programs, everyone 4A and above plays on turf the entire season until they get to the championship game. When you're used to some of those timing routes in your passing game and things like that, it does make a difference when you go on grass and you're just like a quarter step slower.
Yeah, and it's not like that's pristine turf either. I mean, it's turf that typically the Steelers and Pitt
Hmm.
have, kind of gouged up too. I mean, it's not pristine stuff. But even after the WPIAL championships, then they put down like brand new turf for Pitt and the Steelers to play on afterwards, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
That's the reason why they let them play there is because they're just replacing the grass the next week.
Yep. Yeah. So our other top performers from week 5, Jonah Williamson from Trinity had 6 total touchdowns in their win over Ringgold. Marino Graham, the freshman quarterback from Newcastle, who we mentioned earlier in our interview with Coach Mo, put up over 200 yards of total offense, 3 total touchdowns, which was all of Newcastle's scoring, including the game winner to win 18-12 over Aliquippa. James Armstrong, the sophomore quarterback from Hopewell, with a 5 touchdown performance. And then we had 2 guys score touchdowns in 3 different ways. Scoop Smith from Woodland Hills had 2 through the air, a punt return, and a rushing touchdown. And Amos Glenn from Freeport had 2 rushing touchdowns, a kick return, and a punt return. So congratulations to everybody on great performances this week. There was a lot of other good ones that didn't make the list, but really these were the guys that really stood out to me, whether it was, taking the team on your shoulders like Marino Graham, the freshman from Newcastle, did, or just having an all-around great performance like Sparbani and Williamson.
Well, I'm shocked that Scoop Smith didn't get a fumble return touchdown for a scoop and score. Okay, here we go. That was
All
a
right.
bad one.
That was yeah. All right. So our streak watch here, and after week 5, not much changing on active winning streaks versus WPIAL opponents. Fort Cherry, Central Catholic, Avonworth continuing on with their active winning streaks. Central's only loss this season was to a non-WPIAL opponent, so their win streak versus WPIAL competition continued on.
Right.
9 remaining undefeated teams, 3 teams knocked off their pedestal this week. Upper St. Clair lost to Peters Township in a battle of undefeated teams. North Allegheny lost to Central Catholic in a battle of 6A powerhouses. And then North Catholic lost to Amani Christian, also in a battle of undefeated teams. So as we get on in the season, we're getting these matchups of undefeated versus undefeated, and it kind of winnows the pool down a little bit. On the flip side, only 11 teams remain winless. Mount Lebanon, Charleroi, and Summit Academy got wins this week. Shout out to Summit Academy. I'll talk about them a little more in a minute because that's a nice story for that program. On the active losing streak side, everyone continued on, and none of the games were particularly close. Stowe Rocks lost to Charleroi, their 16th straight loss, but that was Charleroi's first win of the season. So that was a matchup of teams that were winless going in.
Yeah, that was rough.
Yeah. All right. And then on the conference winning and losing streak side, conference winning streaks pretty much all continued. Amani Christian played a non-conference game, but everyone else, Neshannock, Fort Cherry, Clairton, Central, and McKeesport continuing on their winning ways. Ending their 25-game conference losing streak, Summit Academy got a win over Rochester. Now, for those who don't know, Summit Academy is a school up in Butler County for adjudicated youth. So, kids who have been through the court system and kind of get assigned there for school. And so they have complete roster turnover every year because the kids are only there for like a year that they have to be at the school. So, a lot of what
it's great that they offer them athletics.
Yeah. And a lot of what their program is just kind of teaching them about rules and structure of the game and kind of the life lessons that come with football. But, it's one of those things where it's incredibly challenging to try and build anything there because every year you have a completely new roster and you never know. I know I've seen interviews with their coach where he says like, hey, I never know, sometimes we get kids here who have never played football before, but want to try it because they're at the school. So we welcome anyone who wants to play on the team and we'll let them give it a shot. So their 25-game losing streak actually stretched back to before COVID because they didn't play the COVID year of 2020.
Wow.
So that streak stretched all the way back to 2019 for Summit Academy. So congratulations really to their staff and the kids there as well for getting the victory over Rochester. But it's just kind of a situation where the results of the games mean a lot less than kind of the lessons that they learn from football. But nice to see them also, not have their name on top of the list anymore either.
Right.
And then also a shout out to Indiana, ending their 14-game conference losing streak with a win over Knock this past week. So something that I think we should talk about here as well. You may have seen some of the stories come out this past week that Baldwin and Fox Chapel basically asked their opponents coming up to either play with a running clock or basically take it easy on them, have mercy on us because we're terrible. Now, it's a tough situation, but I think it's one of those ones where, look, these are both 5A programs, right? These are not small 1A schools that only have 15, 20 people on the roster, right? And we talked about this with Shadyside Academy a few weeks ago. That was a 2A program that forfeited a game when they definitely had enough players to play Clairton. They just didn't want to get their butts whipped. So, for 5A size programs to basically say like, oh, please take it easy on us. I understand the current situation in the current year may be challenging and maybe the last few seasons have been challenging for them. But like, look at what Coach Mo did at Newcastle, right? He took a team that was 1-9, 2 straight years, got them to basically
in 4A. I mean,
in
4A
right.
school.
And, basically got them to 500 the first year and then now has them 5-1 the second year. Like, we've seen these turnaround stories before. It's not like these schools are hurting for bodies, right? Like they have plenty.
They're hurting for emotion. They're hurting for leadership.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I should say I should preface that they are hurting for bodies on their roster. They can't get kids to come out and play. Like that was part of Baldwin's thing was they said that they only had like 20 some players come to practice that week. And it was like, well, some of that is that, it's not that their student body is small. It's that they can't get players to come out for the team. Now, whatever needs to change from an athletic department standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, and I know the coaches are trying hard, right? Like the guy at Baldwin used to coach at McKeesport, and like, it's not that he's not trying with what he has, but schools like this have a lot of challenges around their programs too. Like
Mhm.
to me, Springdale's a completely different story, right? Because Springdale's a 1A size program. Yes, they forfeit to Leechburg this week. They're a 1A size program. They only had like, I think they may have been lucky to have 20 kids on the roster at the beginning of the season. Then you get a couple injuries. Now I think they said they only had 10 healthy players. So like they don't have enough. Oh, if you only have 10 healthy guys,
Mhm.
you kind of have to forfeit, right? Which stinks, but like it's still, they're still going out and playing when they can. And
Mhm.
Sarah Catholic a few weeks ago went out with I think 14 guys and played against Clairton. And you never heard a peep out of Sarah Catholic
Right.
about wanting to forfeit the game or whatever.
Sure.
So I I just have a hard time swallowing it when it's larger programs, when it's 4A, 5A size schools that are saying like, oh, have mercy on us, take it easy on us, because like, sometimes you got to look in the mirror first and be like, well, what are we doing wrong that we can't get enough kids to come out and play football?
I had a very unique experience with that here locally over a couple years. And I'm not gonna mention the school's name, and that, but to the point that they're out there trying. I mean, they had a girl on their team
Hmm.
playing offensive line, okay? Uh, and they were getting trampled, okay? But they went out there and they played to the best of their ability. And the coach of the team that they played against was the one that talked to the team after the game, basically firing them up, telling them to keep up, keep going. Uh, and that so to just throw in the towel, I think, and I don't want to, obviously we don't know the details of that, but all I know is that I've been around programs that have been through this and have fought back. And now, even though it's not the greatest program in the world, at least they're out there winning games and competing week in, week out. And it just is a flip. The switch just doesn't flip. And you go from total obscurity to, respectability. I mean, sometimes it's going to take a generation, but you don't just throw in the towel. What kind of life lesson is that?
Right. Yeah. What's that teaching? What's that teaching the kids, right? That it's like, oh, but at the same time, I know from reading articles about the Baldwin situation, it sounded like they were kind of in a position where there were some parents threatening to pull their kids off the team because they didn't feel it was safe for their kids to be
All right,
going
well,
out there and
go.
things like that. But it, it's that just kind of speaks to the whole culture around the team and the program too. That, yeah, that
I
it's a
broadcast the
difficult
game.
situation. But I think to your point, right? I'm old enough to remember there was a few years ago. I want to say it was like um I it was within the last 10 years, I'm pretty sure. But Avella, small 1A size school, um, they were down on players were injured. They trotted out there a cheerleader and a member of the band who had never played football before, just so they could get 11 players on the field. I can't say 11 guys because they put a cheerleader out there, but like
Right.
it was literally like it made the New York Times. That they they it was 2008 actually. So I guess it was a little more than 10 years ago, but still, nevertheless, right? Like Avella, a 1A size school, going out there just getting people on the field to play, right? Like they had a cheerleader and a band member come out to give them 11 guys so they could keep playing. 11 players, excuse me. Cheerleader's not a guy. But nevertheless, right? It's one of those things where, I think that speaks to the culture around the program that, they did a team like that did everything they could to get out there and let the players play and, not take games away from these kids rather than, taking the easy way out or saying, hey, have mercy on us. Let's play with a running clock, or let's play with shorter quarters, or what have you.
I sat in the stands last year. To your point of, parents concerned about their child's safety. I was broadcasting a game last year. We were sitting al fresco, and everybody knows, al fresco for me means, we're out in the stands there in that team. And I was seeing the score just keep going up and up and up in the first half, and you're hearing the parents and whatever like that. I understand. In fact, the team didn't come out after halftime. Which was very interesting, and and it was a reputable athletic program or what have you. But but I understand the situation with the parents. They want their kids to participate, and yet there's a point where safety comes into play. And that's what we're not talking about in relationship to these, schools and teams and what have you, is the reason why, look, they still want the benefit of athletic competition. It's just there's a safety factor involved in going out there and butting heads with these people with the type of athletes they have versus what they're up against. And we haven't talked about that, and whether that's involved, I don't know, but that could be a valid point as well.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about this more, in the coming weeks, especially as we get closer to realignment and whatnot in the wintertime. But to me, there's two, I don't want to call them easy, but there's two potential solutions that the WPIAL could consider to this. One is opening up and offering more like 8-man football, right? That if you just can't get enough players out to play 11 on 11, there's schools like Kennedy Catholic up in Mercer moved to playing 8-man football this year, and their travel schedule is just brutal because there's not a lot of 8-man football
Not a
teams
lot of
in
eight-man, yeah, in Pennsylvania.
Western PA. Yeah, so they're playing some teams from Ohio and New York and things like that. But I think, opening up the possibility of 8-man football, I think would potentially, benefit some of these programs. The other thing they could do, and it's something we've talked a lot on the show about, is mixed classification conferences, where a team like Fox Chapel or Baldwin, I'll use Fox Chapel as an example. So they're in the North Hills and they're a 5A size school. The WPIAL says, okay, you're a 5A school. You're playing out, your conference opponents are all 5A teams. Well, they could, bump them down a little bit and put them in with some 4A or 3A size programs that they might be able to compete against a little bit better, instead of the 5A programs that they're in with. So allowing teams to play in a mixed classification conference would also potentially, help things like that.
Well, we had a nice comment here from on the chat, Darksider 270 20,076, basically saying Baldwin should play an independent schedule until they can rebuild their culture and numbers.
There's been quite a few WPIAL teams that have gone the independent route, most of them down in Fayette County, but you've got Albert Gallatin, Uniontown, Connellsville, Brownsville have all gone the independent route over the last 5 or 6 years. And hey, Albert Gallatin is undefeated right now. They just had a kid score 7 touchdowns in a game against Allegheny, Maryland this past week, who's a pretty good team from Maryland. So, and part of the problem with those Fayette County schools was the travel schedule. Like that's why Connellsville went independent this year, because their travel schedule was going to be brutal because all of their other Fayette County opponents had all gone independent. And, especially when we went to 6 classifications, this was one area where it harmed things that before you had like Albert Gallatin, Connellsville, Laurel Highlands, Uniontown were all like 3A size programs. So you could have the 4 of them with a relatively close travel schedule all playing each other. Connellsville was quad A for a little bit too, but still, all of them were pretty close there. Then when we went to 6 classifications, all of them got spread out, so they didn't have any of their natural rivals, their close geographic opponents, and their travel schedules got all messed up. So I've heard
Well,
some rumors that some of them may think about coming back, but it is I agree with the comment about going independent. It is a good way
it
to
is a good way.
rebuild your program. You're able to schedule whoever you want. Like, yes, you can't make the playoffs. Yes, you can't really play many games against WPIAL opponents. You might be able to do one in week 0, but other than that, you really can't. But it is a way to start to rebuild things and rebuild a winning culture. So
Okay.
Albert Gallatin's done that. Shout out to Coach Dindle down there. And it's going to be interesting to see if any of those teams that went independent come back. Oh, Butler on the other end went independent
Yeah.
also. But I think that
All
is
right.
a viable option for Baldwin to consider. Okay, so let's talk about where we're at with the playoff race here.
Yeah, either that or order breakfast because this schedule could last a long time.
We'll try and breeze through this as quickly as we can. All right, so WPIAL playoff qualifiers, 4 qualifiers in 6A, 12 qualify in 5A, only 8 qualify in 4A. So that's definitely going to make for very tight races in the 4A conferences. In 3A, 12 teams qualify, in 2A 13, and in 1A 16. So there are some wild cards. Basically, in every classification except for 4A, the top 3 in each conference are guaranteed playoff spots. In 4A, it's only the top 2, and then a couple wild cards get decided by the selection committee. So let's get started. In 6A, Central Catholic with the big win over North Allegheny, now in the driver's seat to cruise their way to the conference title and the #1 seed in the playoffs. The real drama here, I think, if there is some, is Central and North Allegheny. Central and NA are going to make the playoffs. So then it becomes, who are the other 2 teams? And you've got teams like Norwin and Hempfield that haven't made the playoffs in almost a decade. So that would be like a really nice story. Mount Lebanon started 0-5, just got off the schneid in a big way this week with a win over Seneca Valley. So how about this? Through 5 games, Mount Lebanon had scored 38 total points. They went out and put 41 on Seneca Valley this past week. So something clicked this week in practice for the Blue Devils. We'll see if they're able to carry it through against North Allegheny and into the tail end of their schedule. But I think you've got some teams that have all kind of beaten each other here in the middle of the pack. So it's going to be interesting to follow kind of who emerges as those other 2 playoff teams.
It's unfathomable the anticlimactic nature of 6A in the WPIAL to me. I mean, it should be the spotlight shining the brightest. Instead, it's hibernating for 5 weeks till the postseason. So
yeah. And I think that's one of those things where with Central and NA, like, you don't want to schedule that game in week 9 right before the playoffs start, because then they're basically going to play each other like 2 times in 3
That's
weeks.
even more anticlimactic.
Yeah. But you want to have them play each other early enough in the year that they have some other games before they most likely rematch in the championship game. But you also, you're right. It is kind of anticlimactic just because of how much those 2 programs have separated themselves from the rest of the pack.
Yeah.
All right, on to 5A, where Peters Township got the big win over Upper St. Clair. Moon got their win over Bethel Park. South Fayette throttled Baldwin. So those 3 teams off to a pretty good start here. But let's not forget that 5 teams from this conference made the playoffs last year. There were 2 wild cards handed out to Allegheny, 6 teams. And if I was a betting man, I would say that probably happens once again, just based on how well those teams did in non-conference play. So things will definitely start to shake out. Upper St. Clair against South Fayette this week. Moon against Peters Township at the top of the conference. So a couple really, every week you're going to have big games here, right? This is like the SEC of
this is what it should be like in 6A too. You know what I'm saying? That there should be some drama involved. And but anyway, I don't want to belabor the point on that. I'm just very happy that we're going to have some action in 5A.
Oh, there's going to be plenty of drama here, because this one's going to be week after week of just, high level
knockdown, drag out
knocker matchups. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. All right. In the Big East Conference, noteworthy result was Armstrong topping Gateway 29-28 this past week. Now Armstrong moves into a tie with Woodland Hills atop the conference, and they play this week. So that
That's
will
great.
probably be my 5A game of the week. Armstrong finished towards the bottom of the league last year, winning their first two conference games. Now setting up a big matchup with Woody High. So nice little storyline there for the Riverhawks to elevate themselves and put themselves in position to challenge for a playoff spot.
Sure, sure.
Yep. And Penn Trafford appears in the middle of the list here because they're 1-1 and played a non-conference game this past week. But really, I mean, their only loss was to Woodland Hills so far. So I think at the end of the day, Woodland Hills is the best team, and Penn Trafford's probably second best. But some of those results, like Armstrong beating Gateway, could be decisive when it comes down to who that third playoff team is out of the conference.
Yeah, correct.
And in the Northeast Conference, Pine Richland and Penn Hills are undefeated in conference play. They square off this week. Pine Richland has been a lot better than Penn Hills this season. If Penn Hills pulls this off, this would be a tremendous upset for the Indians. But Pine Richland, being the defending WPIAL champs, are just absolutely loaded, and they agreed to shortened quarters against Fox Chapel, but they came out and said before the game, they're like, look, we're going to play our starters into the third quarter because we need them to know how to go through a halftime and be ready to perform after halftime. It doesn't do them any good just to play the first half, because as we get down into the stretch run in the playoffs, our kids need to know, what it takes to stay focused through halftime and be able to come out and play in the third quarter. So,
Well, that was the reason.
yeah.
That's the reason why the team gave up in that
Mm-hmm.
game that I was telling you about that I broadcast last year, is the fact that because the team that they were playing didn't was still playing their starters up until halftime, and told their opponents that they were going to keep their starters at least for the first series of the second half, and they said, "Nah, we're just going to pack it up and go in and go in then." So
Yeah. And so I think Pine Richland has Pine Richland is absolutely loaded this year. And I think they'll probably cruise to the conference title. The real question to me here is, I think Penn Hills is probably good enough to be the second team out of the conference into the playoffs, but I have no idea who the third team's going to be. North Hills, Shaler sitting there at 1-5. Their only wins were over conference competition. Fox Chapel asked everyone to have mercy on them. Plum, who I thought started off the year pretty well, did lose to Shaler. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But the North Hills Plum game this week is a pretty big one
mhm.
for figuring out who that third team out of the conference might be.
I don't know. I mean, we'll see.
Yes. Well, and once again, it gets back to things we've talked about before with different teams having different definitions of success, right?
Correct.
The
Absolutely right, Ian. Don't let me, like, get in your way of that level of detail when it comes to conference stuff like that. I mean, sometimes, I don't want to say sometimes, all the time, I let the big picture get just put my view in a different way, and I shouldn't do that. So
Yeah, and I think in some respects it's easy to have that big picture focus, at the start of the season, but then like the middle of the year to me this is where we get some of the really interesting storylines, because you kind of know who's got the horses and who's gonna be there at the end. So to me, like the middle, this is the time of year when teams like I'll go back here. Teams like a Shaler, who's sitting at 1-5 and hasn't made the playoffs since 2019. Like, if they can pull off a couple wins, like if they can beat North Hills in a couple
it gets
weeks
some momentum.
and get
Their
some momentum
next year's their
and
next year's feel good story.
just make the playoffs, right? Like,
Mhm.
for Pine Richland, their definition of success is not only winning a WPIAL title, but probably contending for a state title.
Mhm.
Whereas Shaler's like, we haven't made the playoffs in 5 years. Like, just getting to the playoffs would be huge for Shaler's program. So,
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, you highlight that so effectively, and like I said, let's just say a team like Shaler having a decent year is the feel good story next year,
mhm.
and one thing that we always pride ourselves on is, highlighting those types of teams, the feel good stories and the teams that are coming out of nowhere, to have success.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, on to 4A, where Char Valley, Trinity, and Thomas Jefferson won their conference openers. This is another one just because only the top two teams in 4A are guaranteed playoff spots. Char Valley and TJ got off to really good starts in non-conference play, but things are going to get a lot harder for Chartiers Valley here down the stretch starting this week with Bell Vernon.
Sure.
This is a huge game for figuring out, who the pecking order for the playoffs. Same with Trinity and TJ. 2 years ago, Trinity beat TJ. And it was the first time in a very, very long time, I think since the 80s, that Trinity had beaten TJ. But Trinity also beat Bell Vernon last year and was the second team in the playoffs. So I think
Yeah.
this is one where these two games, Trinity and TJ and Bell Vernon and Char Valley, are huge for figuring out, who's got a leg up in the playoff race.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
In the Greater Allegheny Conference, McKeesport and Mars have been kind of the top two teams all season in the conference, and they both had dominant victories in this past week's games. McKeesport taking on West Mifflin this week, Mars against Knock, who hasn't won a game all year. So I imagine those two are kind of on a two trains, one track collision course to meet in a few weeks to decide who's going to be the conference champion.
Yeah.
And I should mention with McKeesport, though, Keemon Spell was back this week. So that was a
okay.
huge change for McKeesport.
I was going to say, what about the Keemon Spell watch?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep, the Keemon Spell watch has ended. He returned and had a great game. So McKeesport definitely setting themselves up here to go on a big run in conference play. But Mars has been really good this year too, especially on defense.
Yeah.
In the Parkway Conference, Montour, West Allegheny, and Aliquippa tied for the conference title last year, but Aliquippa losing that opener to Newcastle now. Newcastle has put themselves in position to also contend for the conference title.
That is incredible.
I should mention about kind of how the standings are organized, that the WPIAL tiebreaker is the margin of victory. So that is, if you beat a team by 10 or more, you get plus 10. If you win by less than 10, which Newcastle won 18-12, so they only got 6 points. But the Gardner points are points for the number of wins the teams that you beat have. So as Aliquippa starts to win a couple games, that'll give Newcastle some Gardner points, for example, that'll help them with tiebreakers. But
yeah,
Newcastle's got to go through the gauntlet of Montour and West Allegheny the next 2 weeks. So things at the top will really start to shake out, and especially with Aliquippa playing West Allegheny this week. And I will say, we talked about the panic button. Only two teams are guaranteed playoff spots here. Like Aliquippa now has put themselves in a position where they pretty much have to beat either West Allegheny or Montour to finish in the top three. Or
they
top
almost
two,
need to run the table.
Yeah. Yeah. Or hope that Newcastle loses a couple games in there too. But Newcastle's playing really, really well right now too. So it's going to be interesting to see how things shake out. But two big matchups here between the Quips and West A, and Montour and Newcastle this week at the top of the conference.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something else about this?
Oh, I was only going to say, about the Gardner and the WPIAL tiebreakers or what have you. The fact that, we talk about the the points, the in our out here in District 3 and District 1, and the points that the teams will earn in the WPIAL, the tiebreakers with the Gardner and the WPIAL points are pretty similar in nature. It isn't power ranking standings like we have out here, but that's your equivalent of it. And I shouldn't be so critical of the Gardner and the WPIAL.
Yeah. And conference record is the first tiebreaker. I'll say that, conference wins matter the most. And then the Gardner points are your strength of victory, and your WPIAL tiebreaker points are your margin of victory. So it does kind of take everything into account.
It does.
Yep. All right. In 3A, Amani Christian got that win over North Catholic in non-conference play in the Battle of Undefeateds. Freeport also undefeated right now. Actually, Freeport should have been ahead of Amani here because they're 3-0 instead of 2-0. But nevertheless, they'll play each other in a few weeks and sort everything out. Freeport playing Highlands this week. Highlands played Amani I'll say about as close as anyone's played them, which means it was 27-7 a few weeks ago. Other than Clareton playing them to a 19-12 game, but Freeport and Highlands, this game kind of, Freeport wins it. It sets them on the path of being the top challenger to Amani. If Highlands wins, then Freeport would need to beat Amani to hope for a three-way tie at the top. But really, the top three are kind of head and shoulders better than everybody else here. So I think those top three will be your top three at the end. I really don't see any of the ones down below rising up into the top three. They're kind of competing for fourth place and hoping that the WPIAL sees enough from them to give them a wild card.
Okay.
In the Interstate Conference, this was the first week of conference play there. So Southmoreland, Elizabeth Forward, and Mount Pleasant all got victories. Southmoreland a little closer than some of their other wins this season. It was a 23-11 win over Derry. But this one really does look like a Southmoreland Elizabeth Forward on a collision course for the conference title in a few weeks. But we'll see what happens. Mount Pleasant, Southmoreland's traditional rival, will probably have something to say about it. And I think those three are the three best teams. Greensburg-Salem did make the playoffs last year, so there are some wild cards to consider. But I think those three are the three that are going to get the automatic qualifier spots. And then in the Western Hills Conference, which is the deepest conference in 3A, where you've got 5 extremely quality teams, Avonworth got that win over Central Valley. Now Central Valley has to turn around and play North Catholic, who's one of the highest scoring teams in the WPIAL and is just coming off that loss to Amani Christian. So a big matchup at the top here between North and Central Valley, basically to determine second place behind Avonworth in the conference. If North wins, that sets them up to challenge Avonworth for the conference title in a few weeks, which reminds me back to when both schools played in single A back in like 2013, 2014, 2015 timeframe, and they met for a couple of conference titles back then. So weird how things come full circle. Both schools have grown quite a bit up to 3A now, considering they were 1A schools, 15 years ago, but it's nice to see them growing and still having success. Obviously, North Catholic being my alma mater, I'm a little bit biased there. But Beaver and Hopewell are both really good teams too. So this one is one where 5 teams from this conference could easily get into the playoffs. It could very well be, Beaver and Hopewell both get wild cards and get into the postseason.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean,
yep. All right, in 2A. Shocking result this past week in non-conference play. South Park once again losing big. This time to Washington. The wheels have kind of come off for the Eagles, the defending WPIAL champions. They really need to turn things around starting this week against Olsh. Steel Valley took it to Shadyside Academy last week, and South Allegheny got a dominant win over a winless Ligonier Valley team. That's another one. Ligonier Valley, I think they're going to have an interesting choice. We talked about this last week as to whether or not they stay in the WPIAL the next cycle. They go back to District 6. They play an independent schedule. It's going to be interesting to see what they decide to do there.
Yeah, they have to do something.
How bad their travel schedule is, especially this year. So Apollo Ridge playing Steel Valley this week in a battle of teams that are undefeated in conference play. The winner sets themselves up to be the top challenger to South Allegheny. So that should be a good one in the Allegheny Conference. In the Century Conference, we've got 3 teams so far that are off to unbeaten starts in conference play. Seton LaSalle, after losing their week 0 game to North Catholic, bounced back for 5 wins in a row and looked pretty good. They dominated Waynesburg on Thursday night last week. So they've got an easy one against Stowe Rocks, who's on a long losing streak. But Keystone Oaks and Wash High meeting of battle of 2 other teams undefeated in conference play. The winner then will be the top challenger to Seton LaSalle in the conference. The Midwestern Conference, Western Beaver getting that big win over Riverside. The other one, this should have been on my upset watch, or on my upset alert, was New Brighton beat Elwood City, which New Brighton had been 0-2 in conference play and just sitting down at the bottom, and Elwood being the defending conference champs, New Brighton coming out and beating them is a huge result for the Lions. So congratulations to New Brighton with that big upset win over Elwood City. And then Beaver Falls who went winless last season, now has two very close victories, beating Mohawk 2 weeks ago and then beating Freedom last week. So Beaver Falls hasn't put a lot of points on the board, but has ground out two tight victories here. So I think the middle of this conference is going to get really interesting. But I think Western Beaver is the cream of the crop here.
Yeah, clearly.
All right, in 1A, Neshannock, Southside, and Laurel all undefeated in conference play in the Big Seven conference, and none of them play each other this week. So things will most likely just continue on as they are. These are three really good 1A teams that could make some noise in the playoffs. In the Black Hills Conference, Fort Cherry and Bishop Canevin both undefeated. Fort Cherry plays Cornell this week in a game that probably will be pretty tough. Cornell gave Fort Cherry all they could handle in the playoffs last year. They're a tough, gritty team that's going to grind it out with them as much as they can. So Fort Cherry had a pretty dominant win over Burgettstown, but we'll see how this one plays out. In the KDK Radio Game of the Week, featuring Matt Seg taking on Khalil Johnson from Cornell, who's another D1 recruit.
Mm-hmm.
In the Eastern Conference, Clairton and Leechburg sitting undefeated. They'll play each other in a couple weeks. But I mentioned kind of the mashup in the middle of the pack here with Riverview getting that win over GCC. Jeanette's beaten Fraser. Fraser beat Brentwood. GCC beat Brentwood. So there's still a lot to be decided here. But now, like with these results the last couple weeks, like this Riverview Brentwood game's a huge one for determining playoff positioning. The GCC Jeanette game's a huge one between rival Westmoreland County schools. So there's going to be big games every week here to determine who that third guaranteed playoff spot goes to, just as we roll through the schedule, and then obviously Clairton and Leechburg in a few weeks to decide the conference champion.
Okay.
And finally in the Tri-County South, California and Jefferson Morgan are on a collision course for a Week 9 meeting, just like they did last year to decide the conference title. Avella and Bentworth have set themselves up to contend for the third and final guaranteed playoff spot in the Tri-County South. Congratulations, really. Avella just bouncing back this year, 5-1 record. They're one of the smallest schools in the WPIAL just from an enrollment standpoint, always have small rosters, but going out there and getting up to a 5-1, I mean, they've guaranteed themselves a 500 season at worst. And, they play Mapletown this week. They have some more games against the bottom of the conference. Like, Avella is going to wind up with a pretty good record this year, regardless of whether or not they beat Bentworth and make the playoffs. They're going to wind up in a pretty good spot, which for a program like that is awesome to see. All right, so our Week 6 games of the week. Oops, I forgot to put the records in, but I've already talked about a lot of these, so we'll just skip over that one. It's already late. I've talked a lot. Week 5 broadcast from friends of the show. The KDK News Radio team is doing the Fort Cherry Cornell game. A nice ability for them to feature Matt Seg. And then our friends at WMBS out of Uniontown have Laurel Highlands taking on Ringgold. So let's talk about our power rankings here. Neither of us changed anything with our 5A, 6A rankings, even though we had two matchups of top 5 teams, with Peters Township beating Upper St. Clair and Central Catholic beating North Allegheny, but we both kept them where they were.
Yeah. No reason to really change. It's I don't necessarily. It's pretty clear that those are the top 5 teams. I mean, and they're beating up one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's hard to argue that, like, Peters Township beat Upper St. Clair 24-20 on a late fourth quarter touchdown.
Right.
Like, so I was like, okay, I had Peters at 2 and Upper St. Clair at 4 last week, so they basically performed as I expected. So I saw no reason to move them down.
Yeah.
We both had some changes in our 4A, 3A rankings. Both of us dropping Aliquippa out of the rankings. You had North Catholic last week, and I think I had North Catholic as well, that I dropped them out in favor of Newcastle, who we've talked a lot about. And I moved up McKeesport because now with Keymon Spellback, I think McKeesport's one of the top teams in 4A, despite their 3-3 record, that some of those losses came without Keymon Spell.
Okay. Yeah, all good choices. I mean,
yeah. And then I think our 2A, 1A rankings pretty much stayed the same as well. So no real changes there because all those teams won this week.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Now it's time for Bruce to take over and talk about Badges news from the East.
Incredible. And, actually, the one thing that I'm going to do next week is I'm going to add a little column to this about uh, teams that the WPIAL need to start looking out for. That most likely in 6A and 5A that will meet up. They're going to have to keep track of somebody in Mansion Park. Um, but the big news was Roman Catholic beating LaSalle College. I mean, that was an upset heard, reverberating across the state, and you can see the change in the ranking here. That moves Harrisburg, an undefeated Harrisburg team, up. Now, this is all going to shake out a little bit here too, because St. Joe Prep and LaSalle play this week. So I think that we're going to get a really good picture of 6A, 5A on the east side. But, it's kind of, as I said, it's kind of convoluted because teams like, Harrisburg, Bishop McDevitt, Exeter, are ones that will basically play the WPIAL champions and stuff like that. So we're going to put a little column, extra little added column in there. In the 4A, 3A, Wyomissing keeps rolling, Bonner keeps rolling. I had a little heartburn keeping Susquehanna Township at 3, but they had a little bit of they had a tough go on the road, but still came out on top with a shutout. Twin Valley and Northwest Lehigh, that's the defending state champion in 3A. So and in 2A, 1A, there was some bit of a change, there were some changes there. Schuylkill Haven, Southern Columbia, one of those teams is going to come out of the East. I mean, they're both 2A teams, so that's going to be interesting. Line Mountain, they just beat Seal High last week, so that's somebody that could be reckoned with down the road there too. And Troy and Lackawanna Trail, usual suspects there. So that's the teams from the East that the WPIAL teams better start paying attention to.
All right. So next week we will start the Mansion Park watch for
Mansion
the
Park Watch. That's right.
yes.
The Mansion. That's a great. That's good stuff.
Yes. We'll call it the Mansion Park watch for
Yeah, and remember Mansion Park stuff too. And we haven't really talked about the teams in districts. We really need to start throwing in the teams in District 6 and Cathedral Prep, and the like Farrell that these WPIAL teams are really going to have to contend with on their way to Cumberland Valley.
Yeah, Farrell's, well, we'll talk about them in a minute.
Right.
I don't want to
In
get
a
too
minute.
far ahead here
Yeah,
because we also have the WPIAL Blitz statewide power rankings now to talk about based on my formula that I put together. I will say, just having done this all, the formula really likes the big schools from District 11. I think because they mostly play other big schools. And it does give a benefit to playing a lot of 6A programs, things like that. But
Well, look, Parkland would be my honorable mention on my list there. I mean, at 6-0, let's just say they were in my rankings last week, but I dropped them out for like Roman Catholic. So
yeah, and Roman snuck into the bottom of the 5A rankings here. And the other thing I'll mention about my formula is that it's based on results. It's based on who you played, and it's based on kind of both who you played, their classification level, how much you beat them by, how many wins they have. So kind of those formula points that we talked about for the WPIAL standings, I kind of take all those things into account for this power ranking formula. And so, one of the reasons like it doesn't like LaSalle College is LaSalle, yes, they lost to Roman, who was a 5A team, but they've also played some lower classification opponents. Whereas like
yeah,
Central Catholic, yes, Central lost to LaSalle, but Central has played only 6A programs. So that gives them a little bit more of a boost. And so
sure.
yeah, we'll see. And the more data points I can put into it, right? This is only the second week this year that we've had this on the show.
Right.
And I think the more data points that go into it, the better the formula becomes. So
Yeah, it
we've
will.
only got 6 data points now, but as we go each week, we'll kind of keep track of it and see. Hopefully, towards the end of the year, we're really kind of pinpointing, who really are the teams that have had the most success so far this year.
Sure.
All right. In 4A and 3A, once again, I mentioned that it loves those District 11 teams, Bethlehem Catholic and Southern Lehigh. No WPIAL teams getting ranked in 4A, but I do think that's a little bit indicative of how the season's gone so far. That
Yes.
Thomas Jefferson has a loss to a 3A team. Granted, Avonworth is rated very highly, but also Aliquippa just lost to Newcastle. McKeesport's got 3 losses. Mars has a loss to Aliquippa. So a lot of these top 4A teams in the WPIAL have kind of beaten each other. Whereas, around the state, you can see how many 6-0 or 5-1 teams there are.
Yeah. Well, clearly.
And in 3A, Avonworth, Southmoreland, Amani, Freeport, the WPIAL's always done very well in 3A. I mean, the WPIAL's put a team in the 3A state championship game every year. And the only 2 losses that they had were Avonworth in overtime last year, and then Central Valley in that game where they blew a 14-0 lead to was it Wyoming area, I think, and lost 21-14.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the WPIAL's always performed very well in 3A. But do you want to talk about Berwick a little bit? They're shooting up the
Yes. How
rankings
about
here.
that? Yeah, no, Berwick. I mean, up from the Phoenix, up from the ashes this year. I don't think this was truly expected. I don't think that they've really hit, like the tough part of their schedule. Even though I believe last week they beat either Southern Columbia or Berwick beat Danville, who's another good powerhouse there from like District 4. But yeah, Berwick. How about that? Great to see that Berwick name up there in the top subs rankings.
Yeah, because I mean they were a team or a program that won what 3 or 4 straight state titles.
Yeah, and in the 4 classifications, they were in 3
Yeah.
or 3A and won multiple state championships, well, national championships.
Yeah.
Forget about that. Let's not forget about that. Mythical high school national championships.
Yeah. Berwick beat Wyoming area this past week. So I think,
Okay.
yep. But speaking of Southern Columbia, they're shooting up the rankings as well in 2A. Farrell still tops the rankings, but Schuylkill Haven from District 11 up there as well. And, Southern Columbia had a down year last year, but it seems like they're right back, kind of
Yeah, their
where.
only loss is to
Yeah.
Wyomissing, so
Yep.
there's no fault in that.
Yep. And South Allegheny being the only WPIAL team in the 2A top 10, I think that's also kind of indicative of just, 2A this year in the WPIAL is wide open. That South Park, the
Yeah.
defending champs, has fallen to 3-3. South Allegheny has dominated everyone they've played. They're definitely deserving of that ranking, but it's kind of hard to parse out who the other top contenders are because it feels like there's either none of them or there's 8 of them, right? That it seems like anyone could rise up and make that run towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
And then in 1A, Belmont Charter undefeated out of District 12, and they're playing they're playing are they in the public league or the Catholic
Yeah.
league out there?
They're not. No, they're in the public. They're not in the
Okay.
in the PCL.
But there's not many small District 12 schools, so they're still playing a lot bigger schools pretty
Yeah,
often, which I
correct.
think is why
Correct.
the
Yeah.
rankings likes them. Same with Westinghouse out of the Pittsburgh City League. They've got wins over some bigger programs as well. And then only 2 WPIAL teams ranked, Bishop Canavan and Clareton. Fort Cherry fell out. And I think, looking at the rankings and the formula, I think that was just because Fort Cherry beat a team in Burgettstown that only had 1 win this year. So they didn't get a lot of help of like adding in more points to their formula because Burgettstown didn't have many wins. So, like I said, the more data points that get entered, the more this will start to sort itself out too.
Absolutely.
All right. So, folks, you have stuck with us for like an hour and a half tonight. So, thank you very
How
much.
about
We
that?
appreciate everyone. You can, if you like listening to me talk, you can check out the Steel City Blitz podcast on Thursday night on YouTube. It airs at 10 o'clock, a little more PG-13 rated than this show. But if you want to hear me talk about the Steelers, tune in and check it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so thanks everyone for joining us this evening. You can follow us on social media. Check out all my articles on steelcityblitz.com, games of the week stuff, WPIAL standings page. And as we get through the next few weeks, we'll Also have articles on what teams need to do to clinch playoff spots, because we will start to get into those playoff clinching scenarios very soon. So check it out at steelcityblitz.com. And thanks everyone for tuning in tonight and joining us for the WPIAL Blitz show.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and appreciate, as you said, everybody sticking with this marathon ride that we've been on. So until next Monday at 9:30, after the kids get put to bed, I'm Bruce Badgley. There's my buddy Ian McMeans. We'll see you on the WPIAL Blitz Show. Take care. Have a great week. Enjoy the football.